Onion headline puts it, death rate holds steady at 100%. And yet, death is rarely part of our conversation. Why? Because we keep it in the shadows. And that means that, among other things, even though 70% of people want to die at home, only 30% do. But it also means something broader. We've ignored what philosophers have taught us through the ages. Socrates called it practice death daily. The Romans famously would carve memento mori, remember death, on statues and on trees, not because they were morbid, but because they thought if you remember death, you would actually live life differently, put everything in perspective. And Steve Jobs said the same thing in his Stanford commencement address when he said that death is life's best invention. It's the biggest change agent in life. So here, to help us bring death out of the shadows, is a great panel, Alexandra Drain, Michael Hebb, and the Reverend Tenzin Priyashama coming in now. Thank you so much for being here. So a few things about our panelists. Alexandra is a serial entrepreneur who, among other things, founded Archangels, which is an amazing online clearinghouse designed to support caregivers and connect them with a thriving community. Michael Hebb. Michael launched this amazing movement called Death Over Dinner. And already there have been now 100,000 dinners in 30 countries, and the movement was launched in 2013. He's the author of The Endless Table and about to publish his second book, Let's Talk About Death, which we're starting tonight, right? The Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi is the president and CEO of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT, and the director of the Ethics Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. He's a Buddhist monk, having entered a Buddhist monastery at the age of 10, and later ordained by his mentor, the Dalai Lama. And we actually first met at a conference the Dalai Lama had in Dharamsala, and I have been following your amazing work ever since. So, Michael, let's start with you. Death over dinner. How did this idea occur to you, and how has it worked out?
Well, I think quite beautifully how it's worked out. This is the Yelp age, right? So we know, how we're doing as far as when you put something out in the world, people let you know, review it pretty successfully. And, like you said, there's been many, many dinners, and yet we've heard not a single negative review. So maybe they're just terrified of us and they don't want to respond. But the thing is, talking, as you mentioned, talking about death is not a morbid thing. We've turned it into this medical act. We've sterilized and separated ourselves from death. But when we discuss death, as you also mentioned, what we're talking about is life. And so the beauty of these dinners is that people don't focus on the darkness of this topic, but they do focus on vulnerability and human connection, the things that come out of these dinners. I think that the reason why it's so successful is it's not that people are facing death, it's actually that through looking at death, they're falling in love with each other. And that's the kind of remarkable thing that we've seen at the
And is it because they put aside some of the trivial things that normally preoccupy us in the face of something so overwhelming and inevitable?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the ultimate, when we talk about the thing that defines us, the fact that we're mortal, we do have a conversation that gets us goes to our very root. And what it does is it shows our vulnerability. And we also notice the things that connect us that we don't talk about on a daily basis. When you go deep with somebody and you talk about something that you don't often reveal, I think that there's just that, there's a whole different level of connection. And, you know, there's oxytocin, there's dopamine, there's all these things that happen around these conversations, just around the depth and the profundity.
Metaphorically speaking, right?
Yeah, metaphorically speaking.
So what is the Buddhist conception of death, and how does it help us live our lives and also to prepare for the end of life?
I think, you know, firstly, it's safe to say that death has a very negative PR in the society that we live in. And it's, you know, it's like a Woody Allen joke that, you know, I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens. And much of our sort of approach to death has been that way. But as you said in your opening remarks, I mean, part of the thing is that death is a great normalizer. It's a great equalizer. Despite if your race, gender, what your net worth is, it is going to come. And there's something profound about entering into that experience. The Buddhists say, you know, one needs to live like a yogi and die like a yogi, implying that, you know, if you think that you're too busy to live and life just happens to you, similarly, you know, individuals are very ill-prepared for death, and death just happens. But if you begin to, you know, for example, take into account daily reflections on death and dying, it sort of enriches your life in a manner. It changes your perspective on things in such a dramatic manner that you will begin to actually enjoy every moment. Every moment becomes so enriched of life breath because of your reflection on death. And as you mentioned, that it's not morbid at all. It's a factual thing. It's going to happen, and it's mysterious. And just because it's mysterious does not imply that we should be fearful of it.
And Alexandra, you know, there is a lot of writing recently, including by David Brooks, about how our resumes are very different than our eulogies. That, you know, you've never heard somebody eulogized with the words, you know, George was amazing, he increased market share by 1/3.
For George.
So, you have had an amazing life as an entrepreneur, but I have a feeling when many, many years from now, somebody is reading your eulogy, they'll be talking about the fact that you actually, for a year, and you continue to do it, were a cashier at Walmart because you wanted to see how people interacted with each other and with you, and how retail can actually be at the forefront of healthcare. So would you tell us about that?
I will. I have to first own that I do not have nearly as peaceful a relationship with both of you guys with death. I love that. I go to conferences so I can learn, and I really hope that I get some of that, especially to describe it like love, which I love that you do. So I found over the course of my career, I really became obsessed with this notion of end of life, was really working in end of life in the caregiving space. And in the process of that, was doing a lot of speaking, and began to recognize what I can almost call sort of a disconnect in myself, and that I was watching in the summer of 2016 during the election all the news that was coming up, and I was having a hard time connecting with some parts of the population. And so I would say to myself, wow, that's so not you, Alex. Like, have empathy. You believe in having empathy. And I couldn't get it. I literally couldn't get it. And it hit me, that's because I have no experience with the population outside of my own. And decided that I wanted to get outside of my bubble. So I went and got a job at Walmart. And I spent actually the last 18 months. For the first 8 months, it was 20 hours a week. And it has been one of the single most extraordinary experiences of my life. And in the process, what I realized was all the people that we in the healthcare system are working so hard to engage and beguile and get them to come in and visit us, they're not coming to see us because they have these lives, and these lives are out of control. They're worried that their partner is cheating. They hate their boss so much they can't breathe. Their mother with Alzheimer's just moved in. But they are going through the lines at Walmart. And so why couldn't we use that as an opportunity to engage with folks? And when you talk about eulogies, you know I'm a big believer, don't save eulogies for eulogies. So please, to all of us, if there's one thing we take away today when we leave, like, let's remember to tell the people that we love why we love them. But the idea was that you could use that opportunity to reach out and support potentially caregivers, as an example.
And it's also part of what you both said about death, that it's the ultimate unifier. And so whether you are the people you encountered when you were a cashier at Walmart, or the people who may be your friends in Silicon Valley, that's the one thing that we are all going to encounter. And you actually are at the MIT lab. So here you are, being a Buddhist in the middle of an incredibly technologically innovative forefront of science. So how do you reconcile these two things? And have you ever had conversations about death with your MIT lab colleagues?
Yes, I think a number of times we have talked about, what death would imply, both in terms of, brain chemistry, in terms of the understanding, because one of the things that we are interested in is long-term reflections on certain things. And as meditation has sort of advanced into understanding sleep and depression and other kinds of traits better, one of the things that we are interested in is, what does the perspective on death do to people, and how do they treat each other? So, for example, do they tend to become more empathetic about those things? At the same time, the challenge is that if you simply have the worldview that the death is end of things, just a complete end of things, part of the challenge becomes is what your overall worldview is going to be around death and dying. But one of the things that we increasingly encounter is the quality of death itself, in the dying process, that when people sort of report of, a tremendous sense of loneliness in this process of death and dying, I think that's a very sorry state to be in. We live in a society of 7 billion human beings. Loneliness should be the last thing on our mind at this stage. And so part of the thing is, how do we actually foster healthy perspectives on death? And sometimes it's useful even to take them through a process of what a meditation on death looks like.
And Michael, is that something that you're encountering in your conversations around death over dinner? You've talked about the need for more innovation around the end of life, around funerals, around wakes, around rituals. Somebody needs to come in and disrupt death, right? I mean, we've disrupted everything else in Silicon Valley, but we haven't disrupted how we die. Any ideas?
Well, yeah, I mean, how long do you have? Talk about that all day. I think that there's, for me, it's a literacy issue. Well, one, there's a cognitive bias that we have that has us not wanting to think about death, not wanting to discuss death, which is understandable. And so one is just having compassion when you're working in the space, that, I never force anybody into one of these conversations. When people say, how do I have a conversation with a parent or a loved one who doesn't want to? And I would say, are you treating it the same way that you would treat a love interest? Like, are you courting them with this conversation? Or did you try once and decide that they put up, some resistance, and then you were done trying, which is mostly the case if you dig into it. So there's the one thing is that if we think about the conversation about end of life as a kind of courtship, be creative, think about how, whether it's with patients or with loved ones, to have a kind of playfulness around it. The other is just general literacy. The doctors out there and the administrators and the medical directors, you want the public to be literate about death in the same way that we want people to have literacy in general. And so I think if we turn towards it and say that we all benefit, it's a public health situation. It's a public, I don't want to call it a crisis, but I think how we die is a crisis. And so the best way to address this end-of-life crisis is to increase our literacy. So because of that bias, it's an open field for disruption. There's really not, I know almost all of the innovators in the space. I mean, there's more that come online every day, and it's just not that big of a community. So.
And so what's the most innovative thing that has come out of that community?
Wow, I don't, What is the most innovative thing that's come out of
Yeah, because you, Alex, are also dealing in the same area of how do you make the life of caregivers better also, because you've talked and written a lot about how caregivers often, especially if the death is not a good one, end up with a kind of form of PTSD that affects their own health. So what do you think has been some of the most effective ways to deal with that?
So, you know, one of the reasons that I've done what I've done with Engage with Grace, why I'm such a huge supporter of Death Over Dinner, is I think the most genius technology in this space is actually really no technology at all, or technology that encourages connection and conversation. Because I think what most of us are really craving is to feel less alone. And some of these topics that are really hard, we cocoon in our head. And I know from a caregiver's perspective, I'm caring for somebody. I was actually a caregiver with my sister-in-law who died of brain cancer at 32, and am currently in a caregiver situation with an older member of my family who has dementia and Alzheimer's. And I will come home from work often really stressed out, and I'll get into a situation where I get so frustrated that I'm actually yelling at this person I really love in my head, or I'm digging my fingernails into my thighs to keep myself from saying something I don't want to say. And then I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I hate myself. I can't believe that I would be someone who'd be this cranky. And there are 44 million caregivers in the United States, and we have twice the rate of depression and twice the risk of coming down with chronic disease. And that's because the act of shepherding someone through this end of the cradle to grave continuum right now, as a country, we're doing terribly. But what I can also tell you is that when we initiate this conversation, as people come through the line at Walmart around caregiving and caregiving stress, and start by just saying to somebody, wow, that's a lot, thank you so much for what you're doing, you can see people's whole bodies change. Yeah. And we'll often reach over, we've trained the cashiers to reach over and put their hand on them, that's okay, and say, I hope you're all right, and I hope you're taking care of you. And in about 30% of the situations, like people's whole physical body, their shoulders will come down, and they'll often start to cry. And what they'll say is, nobody has ever thanked me before. So think about that intervention. That is in the line at Walmart with a cashier that you've never met before, and these have been some of the most profound interactions I've ever had. So I do believe in technology, but I believe in technology as the back end to enable humans touching, caring, having empathy and compassion, and loving on and with each other.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Alex. We hope you're going to write a book about that experience. And I wanted to ask you about the whole obsession almost at the moment, especially in Silicon Valley, around kind of defeating death. You know, not just longevity and living your final years in a healthy way, which is what we all want, but actually we're going to beat this thing.
Yes, you know, sometimes, you know, ambition can be fueled by all kinds of deception, and so I do have friends, and you know, especially around the whole machine learning, AI, robotics field. There has been a lot of conversation around this, and I'm sure, as most of you are aware, with AI and healthcare interfaces. So of course, you know, part of the thing is that how do you sort of promote longevity in certain ways. But one thing I recognized a couple of years ago is that people want long life. Most of them don't want to work for it. You know, we had a longitudinal research with a group of people, Liz Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for telomere research, did that. And we found certain correlations between people who meditate and the strength of the sheath around the telomeres. And so there was some deduction that meditation might actually help enhance longevity and the quality of telomeres length, which is a biomarker for life and so on. And immediately, you know, the researchers thought that, you know, the entire anti-aging industry is going to jump on it, on this research, and everybody will become a meditator. But it turned out that nobody wanted that. You know, everybody wanted to know, well, can we design it in a pill form to help with this thing? So one of the things that we are finding with you know, this whole interface of machine learning, AI, and robotics thing is, one is, you know, can we just prolong the life to much you know, longer than, say, 90, 100, 120, 130. But seldom is there a conversation around the quality of it, and seldom there's a conversation around the meaningfulness of things. On the other end of the spectrum, there are more experimental conversations fueled by this age-old imagination around immortality. So the idea that, how can we use the current technologies to create immortality, and so the conversations around uploading memory to a computer, or uploading the brain to a computer, and so on. But again, it's immortality in a certain manner. It's not like the body is going to last forever. It's simply that your memories, translated into bite sizes will, sort of prolong your existence here. But that exists regardless in terms of social memory. You tend to live forever in memory of people around you and who are willing to sort of recall the interactions with you and so on. But nothing has been, significantly sort of done in terms of trying to enhance our understanding of death, which is a sorry state, again to say that, again, this is one experience that nobody can deny. Everybody is going to come across it. It's a matter of when and where and how. And so part of the thing is that if we can sort of combine the knowledge base just to create, so for example, a literacy level around this experience, to create the social emotional recognition around this experience, to give tools to relatives, to friends, to caregivers, that dealing with life is hard as such. Don't make dealing with death as miserable as it has been. That there's something you can do about that.
I was just going to say quickly, I'm not sure if you guys have seen, there was a study that was done. There have been studies that have been done on the use of psilocybin at the end of life, which I think is another word for shrooms or acid. Right. I'm trying to get more skilled in this whole area.
Different than acid, but you can say shrooms.
But something that basically what they found, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to feel cool and say shrooms. Yeah. What they found over the course of this study, where they used guided meditations for people who were in an end-of-life state, that some incredible percentage, like 99%, reported after the fact, and these people who were totally afraid of dying, that fear went 100% away. And what they described was they gained a realization that they were part of something larger. And in fact, not only did they no longer fear death, they in fact felt this extraordinary calm and a beautiful extended sense of self and love and compassion. So I do think there's some interesting work being done there that we'll all hear about.
So maybe we don't even need to meditate.
Well, actually, we do. I mean, it's like whether it's a guided meditation about death or the meditation that you practice every day, and many of us do, it clearly now, according to all the science and data, has an impact on how we live our lives. And before we go to the audience for your questions, I would love to know, have you found any effective way of convincing people that it's worth becoming more literate about death, or practicing meditation as a way to expand our consciousness about life? Have you found any particular way that we can all copy to get people to do that?
I think so, and it need not be it need not have a religious orientation, because death in itself is only as religious as your worldview, sort of informs you about it. But meditation, daily meditation on stillness, for example, on impermanence, those two things, in some ways sort of levitate your experience to generate a sense of fearlessness towards death. And the more you're sort of generating this sense of fearlessness towards death, it actually informs your day-to-day life as well. You begin to sort of have this sense of fearless living because of this practice. So even taking a few minutes every day to just still your mind and to reflect on things like impermanence. Part of the thing is the deception of, the self-deception around control. That we have control of everything. And so even for those 10 minutes, if you're able to sort of suspend this idea that, that the world is in a way where impermanence is pervasive. It's a fact of life. You don't have to be a Buddhist to believe in impermanence. Even if you're an atheist, impermanence will still happen. It's that factual. So it's just that the religious traditions package the understanding of impermanence and certain life-changing events in that manner. But if you're able to just as a contemplative human being reflect on this idea of stillness, impermanence, it is going to, over a period of time, create this radical sense of fearlessness within you. And that's the only thing I would recommend. It changes the perspective when you are then again with somebody who's dying. You're able to sort of transfer that sense of fearlessness so that you create this environment of peace. You create this environment of serenity. As probably it happens in your conversations, that the petty mind shuts up very quickly when death is the topic of conversation, and when death is the attribute of meditation itself. Yeah.
Thank you. Who has a question about death, about how it changes life, about how we can talk about it more, not with a sense of morbidity? I mean, frankly, you have one there? Okay.
So hi, I'm Mark Gans with Cambia Health Solutions. I'm curious, you have a lot of people in the room that are, I guess, associated with what we might say the institutions of healthcare, the traditional institutions of healthcare. And I think, at least my view is that one of the problems with the way we think about death in the healthcare sphere is that it becomes a medical event when it really isn't. And yet it's treated that way, and therefore I think often people are deprived of a graceful death because it's always about the application of medical technology, and did it work or didn't it? And when it didn't, well, I guess death then is a failure. That's kind of the way it's often viewed. What advice would any of you on the panel have to leaders of institutions of healthcare of what is the one or two things that they should focus on to start changing the culture within their institutions so that more people have the opportunity and more families have the opportunity to experience a graceful death?
Can I answer quickly? Because I was, thank you, Mark. I was looking for the study, but there was a study that was done, I believe, where they had therapists, psychiatrists, and psychologists just start a meditation practice and then looked at how much that benefited their patients, and that it was significant benefit to their patients. They weren't doing anything, the therapists, all that had changed was that they started meditating, and then the patient's life improved. So I would say to people that are in the medical space, familiarize yourself with this thing that you're trying to defeat. Familiarize yourself as much as you can. Attend a death meditation. Have one of these conversations. To the extent that you're able to have comfort, have literacy, both your institutions and the patients that you touch, their comfort level, and you will all rise.
Great. Any other questions?
I just want to add to that really quickly. I think the other thing to do is to remember that time and time again, physicians have shown us, the healthcare system has shown us, that when the population demands something, they do it. And so I think ultimately the way that we're going to get providers to start speaking more openly about end of life, or better, living your very best days until your last, is you get the population to demand it. And that's by doing things like fostering these conversations and fostering this awareness, making sure everyone in your population knows what their wishes would be, and knows that somebody could explain that for them on their behalf and would be willing to advocate for them, so that if they get in a situation in the healthcare system where that's not happening, that family member or that individual can kick in. And I think ultimately the way most big things have changed is the population has said, we're changing this right now, and I think this is a perfect moment. I think all of us feel the urgency around this.
And there are many other questions I see in the room, but unfortunately we have run out of time. But on Thrive, we have a dedicated section called Let's Talk About Death. So anybody who hasn't had a chance to talk about it, please send us your views, your ideas, your questions. I'm going to make it super easy, as I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm going to give you my email address, so you can send them directly to me, ah@thriveglobal.com. And thank you all so very much.